Hello, Frisco, and thank you again for joining us. We are at our third series talking about the real LeadHERs of Frisco. And I'm so excited. This particular episode today is going to focus on something that's near and dear to my heart, which is emotional intelligence. For women, it's managing our emotions under pressure. And I am joined by four amazing women today. And these women are going to share their stories of how they've managed their emotions. And then they're going to share with you some tips and tools that you can use to manage your emotions. And so I'm excited to be here today. And I'm going to turn it over to the women to introduce themselves. And then we're going to have some girl talk. Y'all just happen to be witnesses to real talk here. So we're going to have some fun today. So thank you for joining. Kimberly.
Yes. So I am Kimberly Evans. I own a company called Purpose Consulting. We are a full service financial firm. I have been in Frisco now for 13 years, and I really, really enjoy the women of Frisco, where we're going, where we're headed. And I think that's about enough about me while we get started.
Awesome.
All right. So I'm Arlene Green. I've been in Frisco for 17 years, grew up in Virginia. Here with my husband, Kelvin, and my daughter, Lauren, who was 2 when we got here. Professionally, I'm an organizational psychologist, author, executive coach, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. I enjoy volunteering in the community with Frisco, and looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, and Arlene's modest. She never says, I am Dr. Arlene Green, just so you know, but she is Dr. Arlene Green.
This is true.
Awesome.
My name is Laxmi Tummala, and I have lived in Frisco for 13 years with my husband and 2 wonderful sons. And I am in real estate. My background, I'm actually a CPA by education, but about 17 years ago, I decided that was not my passion and that real estate was. So I've been in real estate ever since then, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having this conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us, for sure. My name is Shenna, Lawless. I am the commander for the Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW, here in Frisco. Served in the United States Army from 2003 to 2008. Professionally, I'm at FedEx office here in their legal department, their corporate headquarters here in Plano. But I love serving the veteran community. I love being the first female commander of this post in 54 years. It's really just a blessing to have to be able to continue to serve after we've hung up our uniform. So that's one of the things that's really a passion of mine.
I'm excited.
I should probably mention that my husband and my twins here, they would be like, oh, you left me out. So yes, my wonderful husband retired after 20 years of the Army as well. And we live here in Frisco for 14 years with my twins that are about to be 9 tomorrow.
Oh, and they're so gorgeous. And so we call Shenna Commander. Because she commands this post, and I love watching her with this group of men. Like, she just says what she wants done, and they all follow suit. So
I think they tolerate me for sure.
I love that. Well, ladies, we're going to get started and just have some girl talk here about emotional intelligence. And one of the reasons that I really love this particular topic is I think as women, sometimes we get branded for our emotions, and sometimes not so in a positive way. And so I really wanted to just start the conversation with getting your perspective of what does emotional intelligence mean to you? So when you heard me ask, hey, I want you guys to come in and let's have some girl talk on emotional intelligence, what were some of the things that immediately came to your mind as you thought about this topic? And it doesn't have to go in order. You can just kind of chime in.
Well, I'll go first. And partly the reason I'll go first is because one of the things I didn't say in my introduction on intentionally is that I'm an attorney with an MBA. And one of the things we're trained on in law school is how to deal with people. And so it's interesting that emotional intelligence is not the term they use when you're talking about it from a legal perspective, but it's really how you get people to tell you what you want them to know or to behave a certain way. But as I've matured a little bit, I think what's interesting to me is that aging, if you're blessed enough to live long enough, you age. Right? But you don't necessarily have to mature. Maturing is an option, and emotional maturity is also an option. And so one of the things I always do is, like, when something happens, I have to ask myself, first issue, can I change it? If I can change it, am I the person to change it? And then do I take action? And I think by doing that, as I've matured, which means you have to learn that behavior, right? Which is hard work. But as I've matured, I gotten better at that. And by the time you go through those questions, then you actually react appropriately. However, I still want to reiterate that it takes work. It's a choice, and it's a lot of work because it starts with you. and then it goes external. And I think most people want to point externally first and blame everybody. So that was the things that ran through my head as my own journey through that process, from a legal career to a professional career to the now running a consulting company, all still in financial services in some way, but definitely different aspects of emotional intelligence and what is required of me.
I love that. As I'm listening at you, Kimberly, so many things come to mind. But one of those things that I think about is the quote from Maya Angelou that says that if you don't like something, change it. And if you can't change it, change your attitude about it.
Yes,
and
exactly.
That's what you brought to my mind, thinking about, how do we react to stimuli? And the reality is, we can't control the things around us, but we can control how we respond to it. So thank you for that. Absolutely. Anybody else want to chime in on what your initial thoughts were when we decided to talk about emotional intelligence?
So I was really happy to be involved in this topic because it affects every single aspect of your life. Yeah. It affects not only your work, it affects your family, your children, your husband, your other relationships, your friendships. It just affects everything. And if there's one thing I've learned about emotional intelligence is that it is a choice to grow in that area, and we make mistakes. But that is okay. Looking back at the day or looking back at the week and seeing what is it that I could have done better? How did I respond, and how could I have done that better? We grow from that, and that is so important to do on a day-to-day basis to improve kind of all aspects of life. And so I really feel very closely about this, very, very strongly about this topic. I'm in real estate, so it affects me on a day-to-day basis because I'm working with clients who are making a big decision.
Yeah.
It's an emotional decision, and there's a huge psychological aspect that comes with buying a home. And so every time I'm working, and I've got stories I can tell you of how people respond to things, and you have to look at the backstory and try and figure out why they're responding that way. And so it affects all of us on a day-to-day basis. So this is a great topic.
I love that. I love that. And you're so right. One of the things you said, Laxmi, that I think is so important is we have to be self-reflective. That's a part of the key to emotional intelligence is really having that ability to look inward and be honest with ourselves and say, okay, I missed that one emotionally. I didn't respond the way that I should or could have responded, and then pivot and do better next time. So I love that. Who else wants to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I'll add in. Yeah. I was excited about it because I think especially in business, corporate world, there was really a time where people felt like you needed to separate emotions. It was like, we're going to focus on the work and separate emotions. But over the last decade, and especially in the pandemic, those things were so much more integrated for people because you're working at home and you're in your own personal environment. And so there's not this ability to separate work from who you are as a person. Yeah. So it really created this different conversation for people around who we are as whole people and how do you bring all of that to work. And so a lot of leaders I was talking about, they were saying, wow, I'm having conversations with people I've never had before. Like, I didn't have to have this conversation before because you weren't as integrated in someone's life. But I think it's a change that's really positive because we can live kind of connected, like whole people, whole lives all the time. I think it's a change that I'm excited about, but it's really different for a lot of people. They're having to dig in and understand emotional intelligence, I think, at a level that probably for a while you just kind of tried to separate it. Not that it was real, but you tried to separate it when you were in a work environment.
I love that. Because it's hard, especially in the workplace, sometimes for people to bring their emotions to work, and then for leaders to help try to interpret what those emotions mean. So it's, sometimes it's kind of to your point. I remember when I was in corporate, it was about checking your emotions at the door. And especially for women, like, no tears, no fears. I mean, exactly. You had to be like really stoic in order to, in my mind, fit in and to be accepted and to be seen as a leader. Like, I could not show my feminine emotions at work. And you're right. I mean, that has changed over the years. And I think as women, we stepped up to the plate and we said, look, you're either going to get all of me or you're not going to get any of me. And so why not take all of me? I love that song. So let's hear from Commander, because I know you had some different experiences, I would imagine.
I was excited about the topic for sure, but then I was trying to figure out how am I going to possibly convey this to anybody? In the military, it's just like you said, I mean, you come in, you do your job every day, and there is no time for emotions because, that could mean, in a training situation or even a combat situation, life or death. I mean, you rely on your training heavily, and there is no room for any sort of emotions or, anything like that. So when I transitioned out of the military, I found it very difficult to get out of that mindset a little bit and open up a little bit more. I feel like I probably struggled with relationships because they just thought I was that, cold, be like, man, what's that girl's deal? But really, it wasn't like that. It was just I had to retrain myself into the civilian world, to have those meaningful relationships with people and get involved in the community. Being involved in the community really helped me with that, because it really took me out of my comfort zone. I mean, literally, I was just talking to Wendy earlier, and I was like, man, it's been so long since we talked. And literally, it was, 3 years ago when I was elected as the commander. And when she interviewed me, I was so scared because I was like, what am I going to say? But I feel like that after a couple of years, and I still have so much more, growing to do, but I'm trying to get out of that, hardcore mentality that, it's needed to bring an emotional presence to conversations, and just be real in your skin and be comfortable in your skin.
I love what you shared, Shenna, because I think, as women, sometimes even those of us who've not been in the military, we struggle to make some of those emotional connections because in our minds, again, we've been trained that it's not about the emotion, it's about the work. I'm going to put my head down, do my work, and not make those emotional connections. And I think that, what I've learned through the years is that is as important as being able to do the work, is to make those emotional connections and build those relationships with people. And I think it's telling yourself, kind of like you had to do some self-talk, telling yourself, I've got to change. I've got to make some trade-offs. I've got to make some decisions and allow some of these emotions to come forth so people can actually see who I am as a person, as a leader. We talked in one of our earlier episodes about how it's important for people to even hear your story, because your story is a way of conveying kind of who you are emotionally to people and making that connection. So really good dialogue here. So I'm going to spin it a little bit now and ask you guys to talk a little bit about a situation or a time when you had to put your emotions in check, or you had to take some lessons that you'd learned about emotional intelligence and put them to use in your career, in your home, in the community. So who wants to start and tell a story? And as authentic as you can be, I think is going to be helpful, because oftentimes, we only want to tell the good side of things. But a part of these conversations is telling people where we missed it but how we recovered from it. So who wants to open up and share a little bit about their emotional intelligence journey?
Okay, I'll do this.
Okay.
I'm going to do this. Because,
I can go break the ice, Kimberly.
Yes, I'll do this. And I'll do it because, Commander, the funny thing is I grew up an Army brat.
Oh, nice.
So when I graduated from high school and went back to the civilian world, because I was born in, I thought something was wrong with civilian people. Because in the military, there's a schedule, there's a time. You're on time if you're 15 minutes early,
That's right.
And if you're on time, you're late, kind of thing, And so when I got in the civilian world and everybody was just all over the place, I was like, what is wrong with these people?
Exactly.
And I was so frustrated. And then as I started building my career, the regiment that I grew up with, the rules and the way things worked, was really hard for me to let go of. And then on top of that, I'm not an emotional female. So I think people always assume that women are always emotional, right? Mm-hmm. I'm the exact opposite. Like, it really took me a lot of work to grow into, and my pastor actually helped me do this at church, because like when people are crying, I'd be like, what are you crying for?
Exactly.
Stop that crying.
Why are we crying? What's happening? And everybody go, well, they're sad. And I'm like, about what? Like, or something would happen and I'd be like, okay, so it's done. And it's small little things in life, right? Like some people, and I'll use this really small analogy, like a flat tire, right? Some people have a flat tire, they call AAA or they call their insurance company, they go on about their day and they let it go. Other people have a flat tire and it ruins the entire day. So you're sick, you sleep maybe 8 hours, so you rest. So 16 hours of your day you just threw away because you had a single flat tire. I'm more the type of person is who can pick me up? Who's going to fix this tire? I have stuff to do. I don't have time for this, but I deal with people that way. So my journey was really a challenge challenge for me because I really had to stop and say, first issue, everybody doesn't think like you do. Everybody doesn't function like you do. And if you want to be effective and if you want to be an amazing leadership, and I started studying leadership, I realized that I actually had to tap into my own emotions first. Then I discovered they were ridiculous. Didn't like any of them. They're completely illogical. But I really had to take that journey and really stop self-reflecting all the time and take that next step to external reflecting. And what it's done in my career is now people are like, I'd love to be around you. You're such an encourager. And I'm like, who are you talking about? Because that's not my natural personality. But I've had to do that with people and I've had to do that with training. And what I found is it's built really, really good friendships and really, really good relationships. And now I allow myself to be extremely vulnerable. Like if I can't do something, I call somebody and say, hey, I'm not really good at this, not really feeling this. How do I do this? Or who do I get to do this? And they'll say, oh, call such and such. And I'll be like, help. Right. But you have to go through that. And I think Laxmi mentioned this. You have to go through that internal piece first, like really self-reflecting. Like my attitude was bad. OK, I mean, I really just needed to check my attitude. Then I had to study my own emotions. But then in doing that, then I was able to grow and start relating to other people. And I think as professional women, especially when you're educated, especially when you've had the corporate backgrounds, especially when you're dealing with family, corporate, because like I used to tell people all the time, my kids see me as their mother. My husband sees me as his wife. The rest of the world sees me as a professional. All three of those scenarios require different skill sets and they require different emotions. Your kids don't care. You're a commander. You run your company. You're a doctor. I'm an attorney. You're on city council, right? They don't care. They're like, yo, mom, I'm hungry. Right. So that emotional state is different. Your husband wants you to be a wife. And then in the corporate world, but I think sometimes women really struggle with separating those things out. And once I really kind of figured that out, that's really what helped me out a whole lot. So there it is. Wow. Kimberly is not the emotional female that you guys call, but I'll encourage you. I promise I will.
Wow. Kimberly, you brought out so much. And I'm just sitting here thinking, so there are 3 points that I took from what I just heard you say. The first one is you had a journey going from being transactional to interactional. And you went from having conversations with people and having it be just focused about the work and getting the task done to actually connecting and interacting with people. So I really, really love that one. And then the second thing that I heard you say, and I want us to come back to this one. So y'all put a pin in this one. So I really want to talk about vulnerability because as women, that's a struggle. Because if you're too vulnerable, you're seen as too emotional. If you are not vulnerable enough, then people don't see you as human and have the ability to connect. So I want us to come back to vulnerability. And then the third one is the fact that we as women, we do emotionally wear many hats. And I remember early in my career, I had responsibility for leading a large team. And so emotionally, I was all about getting the work done and focusing on the goal and the vision. And then I would bring that same emotion home. And my husband would often remind me very gently, I'm not on your team. I am your husband. I am not a Frito-Lay. So I do not work for you. I do not work for you. Exactly. So yeah, really good points. Arlene.
Yeah. It's good I'm going next because I'm probably really opposite. I'm actually really emotional most of the time. Like I'll cry at a movie. I'll cry at a commercial. I've cried in plenty of work meetings.
Arlene, what commercial have you cried in?
And I've cried in plenty of work. So I feel like I am actually really emotional. And I was thinking about a story that happened recently, not work related, but it just reminded me how much control we can have over our emotions if we want to. So I had a doctor's appointment, and I don't like medical stuff too much. And I was getting 2 eyes done, things done to each eye. So I had one week and had to go back the next week. And when I went in the first week, they took my blood pressure, and it was really high. They're like, and I usually run really low blood pressure, and it kind of surprised me. But it was like I had all these emotions and nervousness and stress that I wasn't really recognizing, I wasn't identifying, and I wasn't doing anything about it. And so I was really stressed, even though I think logically I wouldn't have said that, but my body was telling a different story. So the next week I went back, I said, you know what, I'm gonna do it different. I wrote down Bible verses. I had a couple of encouraging words to myself. One of the things I learned during the pandemic, I said, is that you can endure hard things. So I had that written down. I was like being very focused, meditational. And when they took my blood pressure, it was like normal.
Wow.
And I was like, wow. I mean, so it just was a lesson to me on if you're willing to recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're willing to recognize it, you can actually control your emotions a lot. But I think a lot of times what we do is we try to ignore them and we think they're not affecting us. But in reality, if you were actually to take the blood pressure of your body, your stress level,
I love that.
you actually are being affected. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of this strength in being willing to recognize what you're feeling right now, because then once you recognize it, you can actually do something about it. So I was shocked. I mean, my blood pressure was so different. And it just was a lesson to me about you really have a lot more control over this if you're willing to recognize it and do something about it.
Wow, that's powerful. So one of the things I took from what you just said, Arlene, is, we actually do have control over our own emotions, our own feelings. And sometimes we give our emotions more power than they need to. And we blame them as if they are a thing that's happening to us as opposed to us happening to them. Yes. Like we've heard the term, well, I lost my temper, as if temper is, something that, can determine where it is. Well, find your temper. If you lost it, then you can find it and hold on to it. Yes. So that was, I love that. And then the other one that you said that I think is really important is self-talk. Like sometimes we just have to talk to ourselves and say whatever you decided you were going to do and you wrote down on that paper to get yourself ready for that visit. We got to talk to ourselves sometimes. And sometimes that sounds like, oh, wow, they've really lost it. But I think a part of emotional intelligence is when you have that quiet time, tell yourself things, talk to yourself. We don't have a problem as women talking to other people and giving them advice. Well, do that self-talk, talk to yourself, tell yourself how you're going to control your emotions that day and what you're going to think. So I love that. Laxmi.
Okay. That's so much to say. But
I know we could be here all day, y'all. It's okay.
But so I started out in the CPA world, right? So I was, my job right before I went into real estate was in a corporate environment. Mm-hmm. And I had, one manager, two colleagues. That's who I dealt with every day, all day. That's it. And then I switched to this world of real estate where you deal with so many different people in an emotional, important transaction. It took a huge adjustment for me to realize, and what you said earlier, not everybody thinks like I do. Mm-hmm. I really was so naive that I thought everybody thinks the same. I think that's what I thought because I was shocked that reactions were different than what I expected. And so it really took a lot of work for me to understand that, number one, that people are different. And then to be able to recognize when somebody needed some emotional and psychological encouragement and to be there to give that. So I say real estate is, 50% finding a house, but 50% of it is helping people get through it. And so I'm going to give you an example that I think is funny, but it's true, and it's happened multiple times. So I'm just throwing out an example, but put whatever context you want into it. Let's say somebody's buying a $500,000 house. Inspection is done. The roof, the foundation, everything's great. There's nothing wrong with the house. Oh, but there's a drippy faucet upstairs. Mm-hmm. And then the buyer calls and said, I reviewed the report, and I think I don't want to buy this house because there's a drippy faucet upstairs. Mm-hmm. And you in your mind, you're thinking, not a big fix, So everything else was good. So it took me a few years into real estate to realize that's fear. That is fear. Right. And so instead of my first emotional response being, what are you talking about? It's more like, okay, let's help people to understand. Mm-hmm. Let's help them to feel comfortable. Let's explain the things very logically and take my emotion out of it. Mm-hmm. So it's recognizing when you might possibly trigger to say something from an emotional perspective and then dialing it back. And then something that's very strong in my religion and my faith is detaching yourself from the outcome of your actions.
Oh, so powerful.
Yes. So I do my responsibility. You do your responsibility. And we all work for the purpose of doing the right thing. And then we let go. Mm-hmm. And let the universe decide what's the outcome of that. Mm. And when you can do that, you remove your own emotion from it because you're not attached to the outcome. You've just done the right thing for the purpose of doing the right thing, and that's it. That's where it stops. So that helps me a lot on a day-to-day basis, is always remember that.
Well, okay. So at one point in time, we had our house on the market. So you just triggered an emotion for me because I remember going through that inspection, and to your point, everything was fine. But one small little thing in my mind, and we had a buyer walk away, and I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Like, really? This could be a $200 fix from Home Depot. So I can only imagine as a realtor showing that house, you do have to keep your emotions in check and not make that potential buyer feel like this is, I'm being picky or this is a minuscule issue. Because you're right, it's fear. One of the things that it reminds me of is this notion of emotional hijacking and allowing circumstances and situations to hijack your emotions. Because in that case, that call or that interaction with that potential buyer could have hijacked your emotions, and you could have gone like, are you serious? Like all of the other things that you could have really picked on, you chose this little small thing. And so really being cognizant of the things that trigger our emotions and not allowing external forces to hijack our emotions and take us in a place that we don't want to go.
So now it's my turn.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so a couple things that come to mind is, and I was talking to my husband about this last night, and I'm like, well, what have I done in my life, or what am I going to say that has shaped me into being the way that I am? And he was like, well, just tell it how it is, like tell your story. So I'm like, nobody cares about my story. But then I think about it, and I'm like, okay, so in 2007, I was in the military, and I found myself on a 15-month deployment to Iraq. Wow. We had all trained for situations that happened, but I'd never experienced any like real life situations. You can train all day, but until you know how you're going to react in that moment, when, let's just say, it hits the fan, what are you going to do? How are you going to really say, I can act like this all day, but how am I going to really act when the situation comes up? So my convoy was traveling from one base to another, and my truck was, we detonated an improvised explosive device that hit my truck. And so luckily all of the people in the truck were fine, including myself. But when something like that happens, you're immediately pulled out into a security situation, and you're in this foreign country, and you're literally pulling security like, am I going to get shot right now? Like literally, is somebody going to kill me? Like somebody wants to kill me. And that mentality is kind of a strange place to be, because now you're not only like talking about a situation, now you're like in this real life situation going, okay, I have a family at home, like please Lord, just let me get out of this situation here. So long story short, everything turns out okay, but at that moment I feel like my training kicked in, and I was able to compose myself, figure out where I needed to be, where my team needed me to be, and where I was the most valuable asset. And so that experience in itself, I think, shaped me to now be where I need to be. Because something that Kimberly said, I'm not very emotional either. Like, I'm like, why are you crying? Like, I try to curb that a little bit, like, and have a little bit more compassion these days, because I know people react in different situations. But what's important is that you don't have to be like that hardcore all the time. Right. And so, and like letting it shape your day, and, just things that you come in contact with. But I guess the way that it transitions the most to me is that I get to help veterans, and I get calls all the day, all the time. Like, hey, I've got $2 in my bank account, or I've got a flat tire, or I need some money for groceries, or, hey, I need some diapers or something like that. And I feel like that I've been in that kind of situation before, coming out of the military and trying to find my footing. So it's hard for me not to be like, yes, we'll do all these things. But, I have to make sure that like we have the resources to help several veterans and not just one. So, really helping them get on their feet. And being able to give back is just my way of, that's what makes me happy. Like, that's what I like to do. If I can help one or two or, 15 people, like in the right direction, whether it be a new job or, a full gas tank, I mean, I'll do it. But, it's just one of those things. It's fun for me these days to be able to give back.
So when I listen at you talk, Shenna, it reminds me sometimes of how when I talk about emotional intelligence and the things that I get emotional over, and then I hear you talk, and it's life or death. Well, it's managing emotions truly under pressure. Like, I think I'm managing my emotions under pressure if I've got a deadline on a project that I've got to submit to a client and I've got an hour left. You're real time in the moment. Like, if you don't manage your emotions, somebody could lose their life. Exactly. So to me, you are the ultimate in managing emotions under pressure, because the outcome of you mismanaging emotions could really have huge ramifications. So really powerful perspective that you add, because it kind of humbles all of us in terms of, the emotions that we think are ones that we can't let out of the bag. You can't let your emotions out of the bag in certain situations, or lives would be lost.
Back then, yes. Nowadays, I'm more relaxed and chill. Yes. And, I love to, girl it up a little bit and curl my hair and do my nails, and they laugh at me. But it's okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to be my original self.
I was going to say, at least I've grown to the point where I actually now ask people why they're crying. I still may think, I just want to put that out there.
That's a step. That's progress.
I still may think what they're crying about is ridiculous, but now I at least let them tell me, and then we work through, and then I'm like, okay, are we over this now? But I just wanted to say to you, thanks for your service in the military, and thanks for your service out of the military. Yes, because although I never served, everybody in my family is veterans. The military life is all I knew. And my dad was actually stationed in Germany during the Cold War.
Okay.
So our high school had bomb threats every single day. And people used to ask, well, how did you guys deal with that? We just did, because we were military kids in a foreign country, and we were fighting with Russia at the time. Interestingly enough, we're fighting with Russia again now. But it was just kind of where you were. So you were just so very regimented about when the sirens go off, this is where you go, this is what you do, this is who you check for, you're assigned this many students, all this kind of stuff. And you just grew up that way. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I want to really, really ask these ladies, and I know we have a track, but the interesting thing to me is emotions are not right or wrong, they just are. Mm-hmm. And they're different for all of us. So the trick to it all, I think, and I still work on this. I just want everybody to know this is an ongoing process. It never ends, I don't think. And I believe in God. So I think he's always taking us on this journey of like, I'm glad you got there. Now I need you to go here. And you're like, no, I don't really want to do that. But, the emotions really, you have to start with how you would react. But then you have to stop and say, but how are they reacting? Like, why are they feeling that emotion? Because I love what you said about the sink or the leaky small things. Because I probably would have said that. I'd be like, are you serious right now? Like, okay, I'll go fix it. Give me a wrench or a screwdriver. Can we get past
and
that?
Sign this contract now.
Yes. So, but it makes me wonder if that's really kind of the key to it all, is not only just understanding your emotions and understanding they're not right or wrong, understanding other people's emotions and appreciating that their emotions aren't right or wrong either. Mm-hmm. And then how do you navigate that, right? So now I'm far more relational, because I deal with people's money, right? Their legacy, their households, how they're going to take care of all of that stuff, which is very emotional because people are emotional about their money. But now I'm very relational. So I'll have one client that may say, oh no, let's do that right now. And another client 6 months later are going, well, I'm just not sure. And I'm going, are you kidding me right now? But that's how they feel. Mm-hmm. And we have to navigate that. So I wonder, kind of in all your professions, are you seeing that same thing? Like, it's really, okay, I have my set, they have their set. None of them are right or wrong, but we just have to figure out how to make them work together to accomplish the end goal.
I think that's a really important point, because, my husband and I, you deal with emotions in a marriage, every day, every second of every day. And, what we often say is, you can't come into my emotional store and put a price tag on my emotions and tell me how my emotions should feel. And so no different than you would walk into Walmart and say, that shouldn't be $5. I think that should be $2. And I'm going to slap my $2 sign on there. The same thing with individuals. You can't just come in and say, well, I don't think you should be emotional about that. Or I think you're overly emotional about that. That's their emotional store. And so you can't come in and put your own price tag on other people's emotions. You just have to understand, to your point, this is where they're coming from. And as much as I don't want to pay $5 for something that should be $2 in Walmart, I got to honor that that's Walmart's price and acknowledge that. And so the same thing with feeling sometimes is we want to change how people feel or why they feel a certain way. And the reality is emotions are just that. They are individual, and you've got to respect that.
Yeah.
Arlene?
Yeah, I was going to add just what you were saying, that I think one definition people like about emotional intelligence that I think is probably the most common is just the ability to recognize, manage, and influence your emotions and the emotions of others. So you can recognize them. And I think your example was really good. You see one thing, but you're able to look behind that and see the emotion that's driving that action, and to not say, oh, they're talking about the leaky faucet. No, they're afraid. No, they're not. They're not just, saying this. No, they're disappointed. Like to be able to see the emotion and to be able to manage not the thing you're saying, but the emotion behind it.
The emotion behind the emotion.
Right,
Yes,
exactly.
I love that.
Yes.
That's where people feel really connected. That's the vulnerable part you're talking about, which is because we like to hide emotions. And I think what's interesting is even in interactions where we think we're hiding our emotions, oftentimes other people can name your emotion.
Yep.
Because we think we're hiding them, but our bodies tell on us. And so we're often
Our nonverbals,
anyway.
yes.
We're not hiding them anyway.
Yes.
So the more you can recognize it, actually, the more control you can have over them.
Yep. Yeah. Well, let's go back to this notion of control vulnerability for a moment, because, I think as women, sometimes, like I said, we're at this crossroads. I mean, if we're too vulnerable and we expose too much of who we are or our uncertainties or things that, we don't have all together, we're afraid that people will see that or think that we don't have it all together or we're not composed enough. But if we are not vulnerable enough, then there's this struggle that we have of, well, I don't care about people, or I can't make these emotional connections. And so it's that struggle and that balance sometimes for women. It's like, how much is too much? So I would love to kind of get your perspective on controlled vulnerability and what your thoughts are on that.
That's a great one. I mean, that's a great one. So I am not a very emotional person either. And so when I see other people, for example, who have been in a work environment for 10 years, for example, and they know everybody. They know who, the names of their children and the whole history behind. They know everything about everybody they work with. And then when I was leaving the corporate world, I was like, I don't know any of those things. I mean, I know some of them, but I don't know. Like, I don't know it like other people know it. And then I realized that that might be something I need to work on. Is actually building those relationships and showing that empathy and sympathy and listening. So for me, that's been a journey, and it's still a journey to make sure that that I'm allowing myself to get to know people better and to show emotions when I'm feeling them as opposed to hiding them. So that's a journey for me, and it's still a journey. And I mean, they say that people with high IQs are not necessarily the most successful people. Why? I mean, they're smart, but they, if you cannot show emotional intelligence and you cannot relate to people, you won't be successful in the normal day-to-day work. So it doesn't matter how smart somebody is if they can't relate to people. And it's something that, I think everybody has to work on. Some people are born with it, and good for them. But the rest of us,
I'm with you, Laxmi. I'm with you.
Yeah.
So one of the things that comes to mind within our situation in our veteran community here in Frisco and the surrounding communities is people always talk about veterans and their stress, their post-traumatic stress disorder, their PTSD. They always, want to paint every veteran in this negative light that we're all crazy. And but one of the things that that has helped me since leaving the military is being that vulnerable and using myself as an open book to say, I'm not okay today. And, I'm not feeling real great, or it may be the anniversary of one of my friends that I lost in war. It may be the anniversary of their death, or it may be, and we all go through those situations where we have those triggers and those memories and things like that. But the way that you deal with them is different. And so talking about them, being open about them. And I feel like lately I have been trying to do that more. And by me doing that, it encourages others to do it as well. And where, my husband always reminds me, and I was like, I don't really want to share that. It's really nobody's, anybody's business really. And he was like, but it's not about you. It's about you sharing your story to allow them to feel comfortable to share theirs. And whether that means that it makes a difference in their decision that day of how they proceed with their day is up to them. But hopefully, by me trying to take that more like, okay, I'll be vulnerable and I'll tell you mine. if you tell me yours kind of thing.
I like
and
that.
so that's kind of how I deal with, in our circle a little bit.
You make me think about a story, Shenna, because you're right. When you share and you expose yourself vulnerably, it gives people permission to do the same thing. And then it takes your relationship in a whole different level when you make that vulnerable connection with people. So I think about a time when I was in corporate. And I was on, this was during the time of plenty, before 2008, when companies used corporate jets. And so I was on a corporate jet with 6 guys, and we were coming from a sales meeting somewhere in Florida. And they were all, and I was the only woman on the plane. And so they were all having their conversations about sports and, the things that, traditionally guys tend to talk about. And so I like sports, but I don't love sports. So I wasn't really feeling it. So they were just going on. And so an hour had gone by and we talked about basketball and football and, all these subjects. So I thought, you know what? It's time for us to get vulnerable here. So I broke the ice and I said, what's the last movie that you guys saw that made you cry? And you would have thought that I had like 10 heads. Most of these people, Arlene. And everybody turned around and looked at me and said, what? I said, yeah, what's the last movie that you saw that made you cry? And then I shared the movie that I liked, which was The Bridges of Madison County. Mm-hmm. You guys remember that with Clint Eastwood. And then all of a sudden, I gave permission for them to be vulnerable. And then one executive said, well, it was the Passion of the Christ that did it for me. And then before you knew it, you had all these grown men who just finished talking about basketball and football. Like, yeah, and I cried at this one. And I'm like, awesome. So you reminded me of that story of, when you're vulnerable, you can sometimes give people permission to be vulnerable as well. And I think, that story connected us in a whole different way. When I see some of these guys, they will say, I never forgot that time when you had us to talk about our vulnerabilities with each other. So. Right.
Well, and I think one of the things that's really important for women is that we have all tried to live up to this standard that somebody else created for us. And so I love what you said about sharing your story and being vulnerable, because a lot of times the journey we're on is not about us. Mm-hmm. It's really so that we can have the strength to help somebody else on their journey. And it's interesting to me because the way I grew up and then where my adult life went, it was all kind of weird, right? It didn't go together, it didn't match sometimes. Or sometimes I felt like it was just me and it was only me. And then when I start talking to people, they're like, oh my God, that happened to me too. And I'd be like, really? And so I love to share with women like the myth that women love to get up and put on makeup, do our hair, and get dressed every single day. That is a lie. It's not true. Most of us, depending on what the circumstances call for, would just assume be in sweatpants, one sweatshirt that's too long, and be completely comfortable and not do our hair or makeup at all.
Don't forget fuzzy socks.
Exactly, right? So, but I think the reason we do that is because we see all the women, they're always put together. So then we think, I always have to be put together. And so then we try to live up to that standard, or we think I should never get tired. I should never. And this is where the emotional intelligence piece comes in. The intelligence side of emotions means that I stop and think about what I'm getting ready to say and or what I'm getting ready to do. And we allow other women to do the same thing. So I think women like ourselves that are leaders in our community or leaders in our families or leaders wherever we happen to be and people are watching, as soon as we let our guard go down, we can easily say, okay, well, now you can do the same thing. And I think that's perfect because then they go, God, I hate doing my hair. And I'm like, I know. Or like, I don't really like makeup at all. And I don't even know how to put it on. Okay, well, then don't put it on. But I think it's so important when we're vulnerable and realize that we're human. Because ladies, we're not bionic, right? We don't really plug in at the end of the night. People act like we're superheroes because we keep going. But when we're tired, take a nap. When you don't feel good, you don't feel good. When you don't feel like doing something, you just don't feel like doing it. Yeah. And the more we do that, instead of having these perfect houses and these perfect bodies and these perfect hair and these perfect kids and it's like, it's exhausting. I mean, you just get to the point where you're like, I quit. I'm
emotionally exhausted.
I'm emotionally done. I cannot do it anymore. But I think it's so important that if everybody allows themselves to be vulnerable and just realize that we're human beings, we have strengths and weaknesses, we have opportunities for growth all the time. We can all grow that way. And then we can just rely upon one another as a community and just really get it all done. Because when you put a bunch of women together, we are super amazing.
We have superpowers. And
we really do.
Well, ladies, we are at the point where I am sure Wendy's going to have to do a lot of editing to get this all into 30 minutes. But this has been an amazing time of interaction with you guys and just hearing so many stories on emotional intelligence. And my hope is that when women out there in Frisco watch this video, that they are able to walk away with some emotional lessons learned. And speaking of lessons learned, and I know we're short on time, but if I can ask you to just briefly give one nugget, one lesson learned when it comes to emotional intelligence to the women out there, and maybe younger women who are starting out in their career. It could be people that are our age who are still struggling with being emotionally intelligent because it's not a matter of age. It truly is a matter of maturation. But just kind of give us that one nugget as we close for today.
I can I think it's just continue to challenge yourself, obviously, but don't make them unrealistic goals. Make them attainable goals, something that will stretch you to your max, but also that isn't completely far fetched and out of reach. Give yourself some credit and just continue to allow yourself to grow. When you think that you've reached your milestone or you've reached this and that, always look to the next level. There's never, there's no stopping.
I love that. Thank you for that.
So this piece of advice my sister-in-law gave me, and I love it. When you are emotionally triggered, learn to pause and think, 10 years from today, when I look back on this day, what do I need to do that I would be proud of myself 10 years from now? And that always works for me. Pause, take a second, and then react.
That is awesome. I like that.
I guess mine would be one thing I've been trying to do even more of recently is just naming the emotions. So sometimes you feel maybe frustrated or you feel something, but you're not sure what it is to take a pause and name what that emotion is. Because one of my favorite quotes is Carl Jung, and he says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you'll call it fate. And emotions are very powerful. They impact our decisions. They impact our relationships. But unless we're willing to stop and name it, you really can't control it. So what I've been trying to do is when I feel something, and sometimes it's just a physical tension you can feel, which is say, okay, what are you really feeling right now? Get on top of it, look at it, is that right for you? Is that wrong for you? And then make a decision that's more balanced, that's more long-term, that's better for this situation. So being able to really name them in the moment is powerful if you can do it.
Really powerful nuggets. Y'all, these are rich. We should bottle this stuff and sell it. This is really good stuff.
So I'm going to say it a little different way. My superpower is the power of be quiet. And you said the power of pause, but it's really the power because I'm really quick-witted. And so I have to pause sometimes and stop and think through what's happening, why, naming the emotion, all of that. I literally had to train myself to do that because I'll say it before I think it and then it doesn't come out right. But this is what I really want to say to the ladies is that you are perfectly and wonderfully made. Be comfortable to walk in your amazing. And women are always waiting for that. So I'm giving all the women here are giving everybody permission to walk in your amazing because you're perfectly, wonderfully made. Show up as your authentic self. People that are meant to be a part of your life will stay. People that are not will leave. And that's perfectly okay.
I love all of this. This has been so incredible. And I have loved not only just the camaraderie with this group, you can tell we're connected and we're, I think, building off of what each other has said, but just the nuggets and the powerful experience that we've all kind of shared today. I'll wrap up with just kind of my final thought on managing emotions, and it's an acronym. It's ANTS, Automatic Negative Thoughts. And we've got to be able to manage the ants. Nobody wants ants at a picnic. Nobody wants ants in their life. And so those automatic negative thoughts that come to our mind when we see a certain person, when we hear a certain thing, we're in a certain situation, and we allow that entire situation to trigger emotions and take us in a place that we don't want to be. And so my final thought is to control the automatic negative thoughts. Get rid of the ants. So with that, we're going to wrap up for today. Thank you guys so much. This has been an amazing time, and hopefully you guys have enjoyed. I know I have, just interacting with all of you today. And thank you for the women out there who have watched this entire episode. We'll see you again next week with our next episode, which is really on community service and the importance of mentoring.